Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here to introduce you to the splendid Japanese composer Akira Ifukube. There he is, on one disc of him anyway. And he had a very long and productive life. He lived from 1914 to 2006. And you've heard his music. Why? Because he was the Japanese monster movie film score composer. Yes, he did the Godzillas and Destroy All Monsters and Gamera. I mean, all those monster movies, those really cool monster movies. That was Ifukube. But he was also a serious composer. Not that his film music was not serious, but you and I both know that if you're going to be a film music composer, you really want to do horror, monster, creature, and sci-fi movies because they let you do the coolest music. And because the actual plot, the storyline is carried on the wings of song. Well, not necessarily song, but snarly brass sections and crazy percussion writing and rhythmic ostinati. And it just so happens that that was Ifukube's style anyway. So he was the perfect guy. In fact, he turned his Godzilla music and other monster movie music into his Symphonic Fantasias, numbers 1, 2, and 3, just like Korngold took his film music and made his violin concerto and all that other stuff. It's a long and illustrious 20th century practice, but he was a splendidly entertaining composer. His actual musical style was part, of course, Japanese nationalism based on Japanese folk music and that kind of stuff. But aesthetically, he was closest to Stravinsky and the French neoclassicists, Roussel and people like that, with heavy rhythmic ostinati percolating along relentlessly and colorful orchestration with some fun bits of folk song fragments and other melodic things. His basic outlook was French in style, as so many Japanese composers were, including, Takemitsu, who was French avant-garde. Ifukube was not avant-garde at all, but he was definitely 20th century, definitely a modernist, and his music is just great fun, terrific to listen to, and very, very, very entertaining. So let's look at these two discs and listen to some samples, shall we? Let's see. Symphonia Tapkara is on this disc. This is a Naxos disc featuring the Russian Philharmonic Orchestra and Dmitry Yablonsky, and they played this stuff very, very well. And they're well recorded, too. You get three works. The Symphonia Tapkara and Ritmika Ostinata for piano and orchestra, which really is rhythmic and really obstinate. It just goes. It's kind of relentless, actually. And then finally, the Symphonic Fantasia number 1, which is the Godzilla music, the monster movie music. And of course, when you hear it, you'll think, holy mackerel, I've heard that before. But as is always the case, or most of the times with film music, it sounds rather different away from the pictures when you have to just listen to music qua music, simply for what it is, as musical entertainment. But it works extremely well that way, I have to say. And it does sound like, something stomping on Tokyo, a little teeny model of Tokyo, or, the power station out in the Tokyo outskirts. Remember that? The little wires and the cute little cars and fake little trucks, and the giant Godzilla puppet thing comes along and goes, pow, 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 pow. Well, that's what this sounds like. It's quite wonderful. But let's start at the beginning. I want to play you a couple movements of the Sinfonia Tapkara, which is a lovely, lovely work. Let's start with the slow movement because it gives you a chance to hear not just the noisy bits, but the extremely beautiful and lyrical melodies that he employed in his slow music. So here is the slow movement of the Sinfonia Tapkara. And then we get to the finale. And the finale is just a rip-roaring good time. It's a Japanese hoedown, sort of, kind of. Well, maybe not, but close enough. It's extremely, extremely vigorous. Here is a bit of the finale. So now that we've triangulated his style, I think it would be fun to hear, and we have to hear, a little chunk, a minute and a bit of the Symphonic Fantasia number 1, which of course is the monster movie music number 1. And oh, it's the memories this brings back of me sitting there on Sunday mornings watching Chiller Theater. Remember Chiller Theater? You know, the six fingered hand would come up from it was a claymation thing, you know, like Gumby would come up from the puddle and the voice would go, Chiller. It would sink back down. And we'd watch Sunday morning monster movies. That was my youth. And so I heard all this music. And of course, the first time I heard Ifukube, I mean, I didn't even know there was a person behind it when I was that young. But I found out soon enough. I also want to point out that a lot of his basically his entire oeuvre has been recorded, his classical, his concert works. They were issued in bits on King Records in Japan, and there's a box, a big Ifukube, the Artistry of Ifukube box, which is expensive. It's very expensive. It's about $250 for about a dozen, maybe more, 15 or so CDs. It's not something that I would recommend you get right away. You may be able to find still individual discs from import services or ordering them from Japan, but they're terribly expensive. They really are, or at least they were. Last time I checked. Maybe they've come down in price somewhat since then. I'm not sure. But let's listen a bit to the Symphonic Fantasia number 1 from Monster Movie Music Things. Oh, God, this is fun. Here you go. I mean, music like that is not supposed to make you feel all warm and snuggly, is it? Because you hear the giant creature, banging the crap out of Tokyo, but still, I just love it. It makes me feel so nostalgic, and maybe some of you have the same feeling. It's just wonderful to know that there was actually a real person behind these rather trashy B-rated monster movies, and that he was a seriously good composer. He really was. And I want to play one final thing, one sort of celebratory ending here for this brief little chat where we get to know Mr. Akira Ifukube. And that's his Japanese Rhapsody. That's on this other Naxos disc here of Japanese orchestral favorites. And yes, there are Japanese orchestral favorites, at least in Japan. And the disc contains works by, Akutagawa, he's another reasonably well-known composer if you're into such things, and Yoshimatsu, and Koyama, and Toyama, and Kinoye. Yes, all of those household words. And they are some of them are very good composers. Let's not be snooty about it. They really are. And for Ifukube, on this particular disc, this is with the Tokyo Metropolitan Symphony Orchestra, and the conductor is this tiny print that I can barely see, Ryusuke Numajure. There we go, Numajure. Yeah, I didn't do that too badly. Anyway, from Ifukube, we get his Japanese Rhapsody from 1935. It's his first major orchestral work, and it has two movements. They are nocturne and fête, as in, like Debussy. The inspiration is French, clearly, at least behind the titles of the movements, but the music is already full-grown, juicy, and exciting Ifukube. Even though he was only 21 when he wrote this, he was a real talent. And here is the conclusion of Fête. It is definitely Japan goes to France and has a whale of a time. Here you go. So there's a guy who I recommend that you really get to know. His music is great fun. You can get a couple discs of it, like I said, on these Naxos recordings inexpensively, and they are first rate. And then you can explore at your leisure. And of course, his film scores, they're available on Film Score Records. The complete, Godzilla Eats Tokyo series and things like that. You can get them separately as film scores. But I always like when composers take the themes and arrange them in a more shapely way. Because, as Andre Previn told me when I was talking to him about film scoring, I asked him once, you did that great score to Elmer Gantry. And I said, why haven't you written more? And he said, writing for films is not, doesn't support the elongated thought. And of course he's right, because you have to restrict yourself to exactly the length of the scene for exactly the amount of time each mood or event that you're illustrating takes place, and you can't really develop much of anything. So Previn was not interested in doing more film music, which was a pity, because he was a wonderful film music composer and not as good a concert music composer. But Ifukube was very, very good at both, and he was a splendid movie music composer. And what he made out of his film scores makes some really fun concert works. It's just a disgrace. A disgrace that this stuff is never performed here in the West, where it deserves to be heard. It really does. And I think Japan could do a little bit more to promote their native sons. like Ifukube. I don't mean just the ones who people revere highly in the West, like Takemitsu, because he was one of the avant-garde sort of Messiaen apostles. I mean, he was a very fine composer as well. I'll be doing a talk on him at some point. But the reality of the situation is that there were many other Japanese composers writing in this style, and they were quite gifted, and they wrote a good bit of music, and it should be heard. There's no question about it. And you could do far worse than to start with Mr. Ifukube. So keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.